Welcome to Barnabas's Boneyard. This is episode 2. I'm your host Barnabas, and welcome one and all to yet another episode of the Grave Discussions spin-off series where I dive into a variety of topics. This time we are going to be discussing a very controversial horror film that has just come out recently. This one is about The Outwaters. So The Outwaters came out on a Screambox, at least in the US, I'm not sure about other regions, on February 17th. So as of this recording, just last weekend. My wife and I sat down to watch it, and we had quite the experience, let me tell you. Before we dive into the review, if you're unfamiliar with what Grave Discussions is or this YouTube series, Grave Discussions is a horror podcast to sate your terrible desires. We go into new movie reviews, cult classics, just pertinent topics that are plaguing the genre and the community, and we consider ourselves to be incredibly knowledgeable hosts. We love movies like more than anybody we know, pretty much. So if you are interested in horror as a genre, if you love mainstream horror, if you love indie horror, if you just want to know more about horror films, and we do dive into TV and games as well occasionally, then you got to check out Grave Discussions. You know, we're on all the major platforms, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, you name it. And Barnabas's Boneyard is kind of a spin-off series. We finally made it to YouTube, where I, in the event that, you know, Samael is not present or whatever, am just covering anything that comes to mind, basically. But I want to stay on top of these new movie releases, and so that's why I'm here. You may have also noticed that I changed up kind of the background here. I could have maybe done some cleaning up, but also, let's see. Yep. Mothman of West Virginia. That's from an amazing artist. If anybody's interested, I'll send the link. But just trying something new. I think the lighting in the last setup wasn't the best. I'm just using my podcasting equipment and literally the camera on my laptop right now to record. Before, it was just like a Logitech webcam that I had. So at some point I plan on probably getting an actual camera and like a legit maybe boom mic to record with, but for the time being, this is the best I got. So let me know if you prefer this setup or if you prefer the setup from episode 1. Also, the lighting and everything, it's just natural light, so not the best, but I'm working on it. So as far as The Outwaters goes, as I mentioned, it was quite the experience. This movie, along with Skinamarink, which we actually just dropped the episode for of the podcast, that's episode 104, Skinamarinky Doo. If you search for Grave Discussions on any podcasting platform, a music platform, whatever, then it should be the first episode that pops up. You can also go to gravediscussions.net, where it'll be the first thing that pops up. So quite literally, very easy to listen to that episode. Samael and myself go into our review of Skinamarink, and then we also bring back the ever-popular Cult Corner segment, where we examine a very cool and very overlooked 80s Mexican slasher called Cemetery of Terror by Robert Galindo Jr. Overall, very, very fun episode. Great discussions all around, so go check that out. But the point is that Skinamarink came out just a little bit before The Outwaters, and the vibe around both of these films is very similar because they're a little bit more avant-garde. You know, I guess you could call them art housey. I wouldn't really, I don't know. I don't consider them art house. I mean, it's not like a Bergman film or something, you know, but in their own way, as far as horror goes, I guess you could maybe consider them kind of art housey, avant-garde. And just because they really are quite unique, even The Outwaters, as far as found footage goes, is quite a unique experience. And the actual story itself, like the concept and how it's executed, is quite unlike any found footage film I've ever seen. It's almost cosmic in nature, not quite, but somewhat. Really, the entire film is kind of an analogy in and of itself, a vehicle for this like thematic discussion, and just how incredibly macabre and fantastic it can be. So the movie is first time effort by Robbie Banfitch, who wrote and directed. And does he star in the film? Yeah, he plays the lead character, Robbie, who, along with his brother Scott, played by Scott Shamel, hope I'm pronouncing that right, go to the desert with two of their friends, one of which is like an up-and-coming musician that is Michelle May, playing Michelle August, and Ange, so played by Angela Basolis. And they go there to film a music video for Michelle, and they end up camping there. Immediately, I'm like, why would you stay there? Just to take in the desert experience? I'm not sure why anybody would want to go camping in the desert, but I guess that's a whole other discussion. I mean, if that didn't happen, I guess the movie doesn't happen. But their first night there, they encounter some kind of strange phenomena, and already, ideas are firing off in my wife and I's head, like, what could this be? What's happening? You kind of see somebody off in the distance, and then just craziness ensues from there. So the interesting thing about this is, I hate comparing it like this because it's not really accurate, but it's almost like a Dusk from Dawn type angle. You got this maybe 40 minutes or so, like of the first half of the film essentially is them kind of, like developing as characters and kind of developing the plot, sort of, and then going to the desert and setting everything up and camping. And so it's almost like From Dusk Till Dawn, where it's like two different movies practically. Not really. It's probably a stupid comparison, but the point is that, you got the first half that feels like almost this character study as you go into Robbie and Scott's kind of backstory somewhat. They have this interesting relationship with their mother. She doesn't really see Scott that much. Robbie kind of goes there, surprises her on occasion. They live out of state. And so that's a whole thing. Mention, seen kind of very briefly. And Michelle is probably the most interesting character, I'll be completely honest, which is why it's strange that she settled into this like almost secondary or tertiary role, depending on how you look at the brothers. And then, Robbie, he's like the filmmaker of the bunch, which makes sense as he's the protagonist. He's, carrying the camera around and everything. But I don't know, it's very strange just how it's treated, because like they develop pretty well, actually. You want to learn more about the brothers' relationship, why they're doing what they're doing, why they're out here in the first place, really, besides just to film a music video, and how they are as people. You get hints of that, that they like hiking, at least Scott does, that their father, I believe, passed away, and that they have this interesting relationship with their mother. And then, with Michelle, she also has a relationship with her mother who recently passed. And that develops pretty interestingly. She is essentially dedicating this new song and this music video to her. And then Ange isn't really developed super well, honestly. She just kind of tags along as like the makeup person, which is fine. I mean, she's another character. I think she's certainly the worst written character in the film, just because they don't really give her much of anything. And then later on, she's just treated as like an accessory after the fact, and is kind of portrayed in like a very strange, inappropriate way. I mean, given the context of the film, it's not like out of left field necessarily. It's just, there's a very odd scene with her later on. That's all I'm going to say. And she just kind of feels really out of place. Maybe she's like the comedic relief, I guess, of the bunch, but even then, I didn't really care that much for her, honestly. As a character, she was kind of annoying. But maybe if she was developed better, I could have forgiven that. But as it stands, the movie really could have done without her, and it would have been totally fine. And and that's like the first half of the movie. And then it dives into the fucking craziness, and we kind of lose all of that, because once the crazy shit starts happening, and forgive me for cursing, that might happen occasionally, but once it starts happening, all that kind of character development and everything becomes like a serious afterthought. Just nothing really happens as far as that character development goes to capitalize on anything that happened previously, because it's just, that's when the horror starts, and it gets pretty intense, pretty wild. But I mean, you'll see what I mean if you watch the movie, but the character development really doesn't matter after that point. Now let's touch on the latter half of the film. Has a lot of potential to be very, very interesting and really memorable, quite frankly. And there are some really memorable scenes. I think the shots that you can see are pretty captivating. It's primarily Robbie for like the latter half of the film. Hopefully it's not a spoiler. The other characters do play a part, but I'm just going to stop talking about that subject. But it's you're going to kind of get a feel for what's happening, maybe, but just like Skinamarink, it kind of can be confusing. But unlike Skinamarink, there's a lot going on, like one thing after another. Whereas Skinamarink, it's all very like isolated within this house, and it's very methodically paced. I don't want to say slow, although it's kind of plotting, maybe it's a little slow, but the Outwaters is really not. There's just a lot of crazy, going on all the time, and so it's kind of difficult to keep up with it, especially as you're trying to figure out what's going on. And then in between all these like comprehensible scenes, there's just more incomprehensible stuff, and it really like dials it up as the movie goes on. So by the end, it's just almost indecipherable, like what's happening. that's what I'm gonna say. So it does not help either that in many of the scenes it's completely pitch black, and this is one of the main criticisms that I know a lot of people online have about the film, is that there are a lot of scenes in the pitch black night where the only source of illumination is this like flashlight, the worst flashlight in the world. That it is just like it's a tunnel, and I don't even know how that's possible, but it sucks. It really doesn't light up anything, and it could have been used to greater effect, actually, if there was more going on in those scenes. But there's a lot of kind of idleness in a lot of those scenes. You have this tiny circle of light kind of flying around the desert, and you don't really you don't see much, and you don't necessarily have to, but there should be some kind of payoff with that. I feel like for the most part, there's even one scene where I can't even say it, but it would have been a very cool scene, pretty terrifying scene, except you can't see what you're looking at all. And I mean, I know that the fear of the unknown and everything is the biggest kind of fear we have as human beings, and like not being able to see something but imagining it is terrifying. But it's still there, it's on the screen, but like just the lighting is ass. And I mean, I know that if you were out in the desert and you only had like a flashlight, you still wouldn't be able to see anything, but it just it sucks for the viewer watching it. That's all I'm going to say. You know, there's a fine line between adhering to like realism and, as a movie, actually showing your audience what they want to see, and at least giving them something. You know, most of the terrifying content in this film is auditory. So you're hearing a lot of stuff off screen that is terrifying, and you're imagining what's happening. And yes, that is in and of itself scary, but that's really kind of it. And then the remainder is just stuff that is difficult to comprehend, honestly. Maybe that's the point of it. I don't know. Very clearly, you know, the filmmakers here wanted you to have this absolutely insane experience, and it is. It is. So I'll say this much. You know, I think I gave this movie like a 2.5 out of 5 stars. I wish I could have rated it higher than that, but it wasn't even the confusion of everything that was happening for me. It was just the fact that as a found footage experience, I've seen so many more found footage films that even if the character is in some kind of like panic in this absolutely batshit crazy situation, you know, the experience for the viewer is still good. And I feel like in the Outwaters, it's not so much. And they don't treat the viewer stupidly or anything. It just, I think that they were trying to, I don't know, go too far into the realm of like, you know, it's pitch black desert. We gotta make it as realistic as possible with the lighting and everything like that. But I don't know, man. Robbie, the character as a filmmaker, just doesn't hit the mark. You know, he's flailing the camera around everywhere, and it's just not a completely enjoyable experience, unfortunately, because you just can't follow along that well. So I don't know. Some people may have a different opinion. That's totally fine. I think there was a lot of potential here to have a really unique and terrifying experience. And in a way it was, but there just was too much left to the imagination, in my opinion. That's what I'm going to say about this. There was too much left to the imagination, because there just was a lot of things that were hinted at, but just didn't pan out, unfortunately. So that's what I think about the Outwaters. Let me know your thoughts if you have seen the movie. It's on Screenbox right now if you have a subscription to that. Otherwise, I'm not sure where you'd be able to see it. Maybe Shudder will be getting it. Don't quote me. But drop a comment below if you have seen it. Drop a like, thumbs up, subscribe to the channel if you haven't already, all that good stuff. And until next time, I'm your host, Barnabas. Stay tuned for more Barnabas's Boneyard.